Report on this.
Yep.
Hello, Dr. Shelkin.
Hello, how are you?
So we're
All
gonna
good, thank you.
the 4D course. This is the same course that I've done around the world, literally. Most notably in China, NASA second, and all around every place except South Africa. Didn't get there.
Ah,
Um,
Yeah.
So this is the
Yeah.
slide set, and so feel free to ask questions. I'm going to introduce what I think is the most potent idea that nobody else that I know, except one person, talks about, the idea of social context fields. And we're going to, some people call this human physics, because this is going to look at human behavior and social context with the same kind of methods that study fields of physics. Most familiar to you would be the gravity field and magnetic field. And so this is kind of my image of the social context field. I don't know if it's great, but it's the best I could come up with. And I've got Peter Drucker quotes in here from time to time. The reason is the Drucker Institute in Hong Kong asked me to be an advisor to them, and I agreed and went over there, did some workshops, talked to them. And they said the biggest problem we've got is how we're going to adapt your work to be acceptable to the Chinese mainland. That's where the main customers are. Soon became evident I had a bigger presence in China than they did, me by myself and them a multi-million-dollar endowed institution. When they figured that out, they basically quit calling me. So anyway, the idea of a social ecologist concerned with man's man-made environment, that's what the social context field is. The way a natural ecologist studies the natural environment, the biological environment. So I found a lot of quotes that are really relevant from Drucker, but my problem with academics in general is first, they're all talking about something they've never done. And secondly, they don't tell you how to do it. They pontificate about things to do, but we ask, how do you do this? They're clueless in general. So anyway, so much for academics. We're going to take a deep look into all this as we go. So this inquiry actually started in the 1980s. My division was building a very complex, difficult spacecraft for this project scientist, John Mather, a good friend of mine also. And the project had a lot of cost problems, a lot of difficulties. In the middle, John walks into my office and said, I'm convinced that half of the cost of a project is socially determined. I didn't know what he meant by that. And with somebody else, I would ignore the comment. But John is a brilliant guy and wonderful person. So I didn't talk a lot about it, but the thing stuck in my brain for years. What John's experiment did was measure what's called the microwave background. This is Penzias and Wilson. By the way, Bob Wilson is also a friend of mine, got a Nobel Prize a long time ago when they were working on antennas for Bell Laboratories. These were microwave antennas for telephone conversations. They look like big horns. And they discovered a hissing that was ever present, and it was isotropic, which is physics word for comes from every direction the same. And later people posited that it might be the remnant birth of the Big Bang. So the big hot flash would be redshifted over time. And so the prediction that the critical measurement was whether it actually measured a black body, it was a black body curve. John's measurement was the most precise measurement of any electromagnetic emission ever in nature, and proved, yes, it was the remnant of the Big Bang. And for this, John got a Nobel Prize, the only NASA person ever to get one. And there he is in Stockholm with it. So I'm going to see how jokes go with you. If the jokes don't work, I'll stop using them. But with my in-person audiences, they like the jokes. And I want you to know when I'm pulling your leg. So the laughing dog will appear up there whenever something's being joked about. And I tell people, if you have any jokes, come share them with me. So John travels the world as I do. John talks about cosmology. I talk about social context fields. And John has more resources than me, and he's uncomfortable in foreign countries, so he brings his own driver whenever he goes with him. And the driver escorts him around through this dangerous traffic. One day, they're in a little town in China where nobody knows what they look like. The driver walks up to John and says, you know, John, I've heard you make this talk 20 times. I can do the talk. And John says, you're not a physicist. How could you possibly do this? He said, you got the charts, put on my uniform, sit in the back, and I'll go up there and make the talk, and nobody will know any better. So John reluctantly agrees. The guy gets up and makes the talk, and everybody's happy. They're cheering and clapping. Then a physicist gets up and asks a very complex question about the birth of the universe. The driver breaks out in sweat. He doesn't know what he's going to do. He's terrified how he's going to handle this. Then he gets it. He points to the back of the room and says, that question's so easy, my driver can answer it. So what I do whenever I'm in, for example, China myself, I always have a client who's driving me around. So I just say, point to my client and say, that's my client. Any hard questions, she can answer it. It's mostly women, but some men too. Anyway, this is going to be our path throughout. The first thing we're going to do is build a toolbox, and we're going to negotiate workshop agreements. And then we're going to look at this idea of social context. This to me is the most difficult part of the workshop because it's not very experiential, but I think it has to be done. I think of this metaphorically like fueling the rocket. That's the phase we're in now, getting ready for liftoff. So I want to show you something quite incredible. I'm going to argue that all of these things could have been prevented with these tools. Challenger's explosion set back the whole space program probably worldwide for years, killed the teacher in space in front of all the students in America. And that had a social context cause, not a, and the cause was unfounded optimism in the leadership. The Hubble's flawed mirror, which I have an even deeper personal involvement with, and that was about the fact that when you only criticize people instead of appreciating them, they, especially when there's a power differential, they quit telling you anything that's going to get them more beat up. And so the worries the contractor had about the mirror were never told to me or anybody else in NASA. Korean airline crashed at 17 times international norms, went on for 5 years. Inappropriate deference to authority was the cause. The worst airport disaster in history, Tenerife Airport, was the same thing, inappropriate deference to it. We'll talk more about these. I'm just sort of setting this up. The worst train crash in Tokyo's history was about avoiding criticism and punishment. And even the explosion of Fukushima Daiichi was the same thing, unfounded optimism in the management. And finally, the MAX 737 crashes. I did this because people asked me for a more current example. So what these all have in common is the same thing, that they could have been prevented, and it would be very easy. What you would use is our online tools to measure the social context, diagnose what's happening, and fix it. It's really much easier than the technical backgrounds and all these things. Are we okay so far? Okay. So what happened here? They all made the same error. They focused on individual technical and academic abilities because that's what they knew how to do. And they were ignorant of social context fields and how they affected people's behaviors, so they ignored them. So we're going to find, we're going to place our attention in most of this time together. By the way, this will take us about 2 full days of time. So that's about 16 sessions. And let's just talk at the end about whether this is the best time for everybody and what else we need to talk about logistically. So what we've accomplished is we haven't done the agreements yet. The slide's not quite right. I blanked these out. Let me see. I need to make a minor repair. This is an overview of the whole workshop. That's what we're doing now. So when we finish this introductory part, we're going to go into mindset or attitude and how to manage it. And this process throughout is what physicists call analysis. Analysis is a fancy word for simplify. So we're going to simplify things to make them easy for you to understand. We're going to simplify mindset and how to change your mindset or attitude by dissecting it into 2 parts, emotions and thoughts, storylines. Look at the personality you were born with. I've got 2 pieces in the book here. I'm going to skip these because the culture piece, I think, is rather less actionable. And the team mindset is a project management piece. If you want to come back to do these after, we can do it. But if you're not a project manager, you won't understand the team mindset piece. we're going to examine 8 behaviors that underlie all this, and they all align with the needs hierarchy of our deepest needs. We have a fundamental need to feel appreciated. All this is going to be explored in more detail. This is just a roadmap, folks, we're doing now. And address shared interest is how all conflict can be mitigated and eliminated, frankly. Deep needs about relational, and the relational need is to feel included. So we're going to look at how we appropriately include others and your trustworthiness and how you keep your agreements. And then the creativity piece, the blue piece, which is my innate home, my favorite. We're going to look at 2 methods here combining address unfortunate realities with 100% commitment. And then finally, the idea of responsibility, which to me is to be able to respond appropriately to what's happening. And there are 2 key behaviors. One is to avoid the drama states, and there are 4 of them. And the second is choosing to be accountable. It's a choice. So this is our plan throughout. And what we're going to do is pick a problem to process with the context shifting worksheet. And I want you to think about one we could all do together. The ones that I do in public workshops in China is I cannot communicate with or motivate children. And that works in China and in most of the workshops I do, because there's typically an audience in their 40s, and most of them either have children or have had children or have relatives with children. So you might want to reflect on this. You can do your own in the workshop. You don't have to do the one together. But I think we need to think about something that we all care about, something where you want to influence something with the human behavior. And we'll choose that with some process as we go along. So this, by the way, this came from the fact that I get what I call plus delta feedback at the end of every day. I give everybody a 3x5 card, plus what worked for you today, delta what would make your experience better tomorrow. And the deltas early on were, we don't want a generic workshop, we want it to be about us. So I'd already built the context shifting worksheet, so I embedded it in the workshop. So every workshop, people leave not just with an understanding of this tool set, with a new set of solutions to a vexing problem, seeing it in a completely different way, seeing it as context. So the agreements, I'd like to negotiate agreements with you, and I'm going to always tell you why we're doing something. The first is we want behaviors that make this workshop enjoyable for everybody. It's not much of an issue with this small group, but workshops in China often have a few hundred, 300, 500 people, so this matters there. And the second, we want to have you have your personal inquiry into how you keep agreements, and this might surprise you. So the second chair will summarize the agreements on a flip chart. I'm not going to bother to do that with you guys. So you should find on your desk, if it was a regular workshop, multicolored cards. Find your, I'm going to imagine you have these supplies. Find your red card. What do you think that's for? Anybody?
If you want something to stop.
Exactly. You want something to stop. And so if in the workshop, people will sometimes stand up and start telling lengthy story that nobody wants to listen to. We love to tell our story. And in the small groups, people ramble on. So if you don't have the card, you can always just say red card and stop. And people use this. This works really effectively. What do you think the green card's for?
Keep going or getting more information.
Perfect. So green is for go, just like the stoplight. So what I do is at every juncture, I ask for a card check before we proceed, and I wait and see all green cards in the room. I like this because it makes people make an affirmative effort to say they got it.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, please.
Do you find that teams that go through these seminars take these types of practices home and use them in every meeting or frequently?
So I'll have a section on this later, but it's a good question. I only work with teams after I do an online assessment of their social context. And the online tool, it doesn't exist now, but you can make your own quite easily. I'll show you how to do that later. It takes 15 minutes to answer 10 questions. It provides an action report for action learning. And I get a commitment that they're going to do it after the workshop. So we're going to see later that the essence of achieving behavioral change is in repetition, no matter what it is. That's why teams practice. That's why musicians practice. So they're required to agree to do at least a few of these after. And when they process this, it generates action items. And I give them suggested action, but it's up to them how they do it. And so in some cases, for example, the appreciation, which is really important behavior. One common thing is to set up an appreciation time at every weekly staff meeting. Another is to set up a tickler list so that if you're the leader, that you're doing this. So yes, if all you do is come to the workshop and don't do anything after, you had an entertaining event and that's it. The repetition is essential. Does that help you?
Yes, thank you.
What do you think the yellow card's for?
I'm not quite getting it. Can you either slow down or explain more?
The yellow card actually has a different meaning, a biological meaning. If you have to go to the bathroom, show the yellow card and go. At least I'll know you're coming back. I don't want anyone sitting in the workshop looking like this.
Perfect.
So we normally have breaks every hour on the hour, and I'll negotiate the duration with people, but it's very rare. I suggest 10 minutes. It's very rare people have something different unless we have a case where, in some hotels, there's not enough ladies' rooms and that kind of thing. We'll make it 15. And what I'm trying to get people to think about now, not totally successfully, is to negotiate agreements. I want them to think of every agreement as an opportunity for negotiation. So green card, I'm keeping this agreement, and green cards go up. People rarely ever push back on these agreements. Then I ask them to be in their seat, ready to go. I have a countdown clock on the screen that counts down with sounds. Be in their seat, ready to go when the clock counts down. And the same thing with showing up on time for the workshop start. So what I'd like to ask you to do is be here on time. We're going to learn later that what's really important about agreements is that you don't break them. So let's just say you are going to be 10 minutes late. Email everyone, say you're going to be 10 minutes late, and that's no problem. But I don't want to sit here recording or this kind of thing. So people actually run and scramble to get in their seats. They take these seriously. I do a card check here. And then large group questions. Now, I quit taking large group questions about 3 or 4 years ago. The reason is that most of the questions are nonsense, are people wanting to show off. Instead, very few people tend to ask all the questions. So instead, I ask them to hold the general interest questions until the breaks. Now, with our small group, we can ask questions anytime. It's no problem. There's no one here trying to grandstand in front of other people. And if you show a red card, then that'll get you number 1 in the queue if there's people lined up. So just show a red card. I'll note you have a question, and I'll be there for you, except for going to the bathroom myself with my translator. And we can decide together whether it's interesting enough to brief the group, and might decide that you might like to tell a group about the question and the answer. So this improved the efficiency of workshops dramatically. This probably took 20% off the time of a workshop. And I figured this out much too late, but that's how we do it. So card check on that. Everybody goes, yes. You're going to learn where attention goes, power flows. This workshop will not work unless you stay focused on it. So I have people agree to no email while we're in session, no side conversations. Attention shifting causes a neurological cascade limiting your cognition. the worst, some action you see on your phone, you gotta do. So I tell people, take the cell phones, put them out of sight. Because they're an addiction. They're as addictive as dopamine as smoking, alcohol, or gambling. And also ask in China, this is a big problem in large groups, ask permission to light them up with the laser if I see their phone. And believe it or not, they're not even conscious they did it. Most of the time they're embarrassed, they put the phone away. So while we're in session, no phones. So everybody agrees to that. And then breaks and movement. So the breaks are not really, they're not a waste of time in my judgment at all. They're a really important time for you to take a rest. Asians are quite comfortable putting their head down and sleeping on their desk during the breaks. If you need to make important phone calls, that's the time to do it. Or talk with your colleagues, that's the time to do it. And think about questions that you want to ask me and come on up and ask them. So the break is important time. We're not going to have a break because we're only running for 1 hour. Or we'd have a break if you want. Now here's a really important one, success on you changing you. So I ask how many people have success in changing other people? And 1 or 2 hands will go up. Then I ask, how about success changing your spouse? A lady raised her hand and said, I did. I said, how? She said, divorce. I said, that wasn't what I had in mind. You're going to find mindset is everything. The workshop is about you changing you. The workshop to change other people is down the hall. Kind of a joke about this. It's not this workshop. As Gandhi said, we must be the change you want to see in the world. So even having said this, people walk up to me and say, well, I can't do this because Joe Blow does blah, blah, blah. And I said, remember this workshop's about you changing you? Oh yeah, I got it. I forgot. So what do I do about these other people? You just model the behavior that you want them to have. And over time that will work, especially if the leader helps you. That we can manage other people's by no means adequately proven. One can always manage oneself. That's a really important idea. Card check, okay. So then I say, go up and sign your agreements. This surprises people. The agreements are on the flip chart. And they walk up and sign the paper with their signature. And I explained to them, then we post these on the wall and said, we're going to revisit these later and see how well you did. So again, I'm alerting people this is coming, and that's our agreement set. Actually, there's a slide that was missing. Let me take a look here. Let me see. Yeah, there's a thing I skipped over. Yeah, I was not missing. I forgot to talk to it. So we're going to get back to this later, but we're going to move every 30 minutes. The idea of sit still and learn is nonsense. So we're going to be moving, and we'll be doing that. I'll set my timer, which I forgot to do this morning for this, so that we get up every in the middle and we all move. And I'll show you how we do that. It's coming up. Okay, let's explore this idea of what these funny social context fields are. What is a field? Technically trained people are certainly familiar with this idea. No, that's not it. That's not the field. A field is something that takes on a space, the fill space taking on a value everywhere. This is one of my favorite theoretical physicists, Sean Carroll. For example, there's a temperature field in the room. If you measured every spot in this room, there's a different temperature. That's called a scalar field. It's just a number. There's a gravity field in this room everywhere. There's a magnetic field. So this is the idea of a field. And one of the most interesting fields is the field of special relativity, which we'll talk about later, the idea of curvature of space-time. Have you ever thought about what's unique about our species, that we totally dominate the world? And we do dominate the world. We also annihilated the Neanderthals, even though they were bigger, stronger, and smarter. We had sex with them. I've got 2 or 3% Neanderthal blood. You can get a test for that today. And anyone with European descent has Neanderthal blood in them. How did we also the what people generally name here is individual achievements like the Nobel Prize. That's what we think it's about. That's not. It's the fact that we are hyper tribal. We form groups, and the prevailing theory about how we conquered the Neanderthals is we were more social. We found a better arrowhead. We all talked about it and shared the idea, and they didn't. But think, for example, how people get at sporting events. Is there anything sillier than getting hyped up about sporting events or nationalism? People form countries and fight wars over imaginary lines on maps. And here's what gets even more interesting. We rely on our collective mind for our beliefs. So that's what you see in politics today. People pick up the beliefs of one party or the other, and it came from the group, but they think it's their own. Another word for this is groupthink. I'm guilty of it myself. I believe in peer-reviewed science. Religions are all the same idea, and politics. Our behaviors shape social context fields that affect everyone's behaviors that in turn reinforce. So we have self-reinforcing feedback loops going on here. So let's look at one in nature. I talk a lot about the fact of near-term extinction of human species, which I think is coming. And people say to me, well, how do I know? I said, well, you watch the Arctic. So the Arctic is the Earth's refrigerator, and currently it's covered by snow and ice. And what that means is that the incident solar radiation, about 90% goes back into space in the same wavelength it came in and exits. Another 10% is absorbed. When it melts, 94% of the energy goes into the water and 6% goes back into space. So the total carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is now 3 trillion tons. An ice-free Arctic adds the heat of 1 trillion more tons sort of instantly. So the day it goes ice-free, and that might happen next year or 2 years or 5 years. But this is the idea of a reinforcing feedback loop. And unfortunately, this requires an international response, and our tribes tend to devolve to the lowest common denominator, as you can see in political systems. So imagine the Earth and the Moon bound by gravity in orbits like as follows. Now suppose an asteroid, a large rock, came into the solar system. Two things would happen. The first is the rock would have its trajectory altered, and the second, it would slightly affect the orbits of Earth, Sun, and the Moon. The same thing with a magnetic field. If I had a coil of wire making a magnetic field, and I introduced a magnet, a ferromagnetic magnet, the magnet would be affected by the field, and the magnet's movements would also affect the overall field. In exactly the same way, we're going to practice 8 carefully selected behaviors that create high-performance social contexts. You could think of the word environment. I don't tend to use it because environment tends to be, people tend to think of the physical environment. This is the social environment. That's another self-reinforcing feedback loop. So when you change your behavior, this will affect everyone around you and change the social context field, just like these physical fields work, and change their behaviors. This is how you change other people. You change yourself. Card check, how we doing? Okay, great. Nico, you on
All
board?
good. Yeah, all good.
Okay. So social context fields control people's behaviors. We ignore them at our peril. We can and must control our social context fields by how we behave. And this is one of my favorite processes, AMBR, attention, mindset, behavior, result. So if you think much about attention, it's really a very precious resource. I think it's actually more precious than money. And so how you manage your attention really counts. Whether you manage your attention watching football games or thinking or contributing or whatever. And what you pay attention to sets up your mindsets. We're going to work through all this in more detail. These are the springboards for behaviors. And as Emerson said, what you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say. And the ones we're going to practice all create positive results. And when you get a positive result, it makes a self-reinforcing feedback loop just like the Arctic. That's what we're up to. So interesting, I work a lot with teams, and the reason I do that is that there's a business market for it. Almost every business person wants better team performance for various reasons, and they're willing to pay for it. And so what influences, the most important thing is that the leaders' behaviors, the hierarchical leaders are most powerful. You could see it in the US government when you watched how people behaved toward each other when Trump was president versus when Biden's president. When I was at NASA, we had a guy with a Trump-like personality come in, and the treatment of all the top management changed overnight to treat other people the same way. And also the technical leaders in technical organizations are very influential. And we have a tool to measure these behaviors. On average, behavior improves 0.4% every time you use this tool. It's a simple tool, 10 questions, same idea. And the other bigger piece is the behavioral norms of the team. And that's what we're really working on with social context. We have a tool that measures this. And I'm going to show you later, this has the most incredible result I've ever seen. Team performance improved an average of 4% every time he did something that took 15 minutes. Okay, so here comes, I've timed this to come about 25 minutes in. So we're going to be standing on our feet in the middle of every hour and moving. I got this idea from Gretchen Reynolds. She's the fitness editor for New York Times. And she wrote a book called The First 20 Minutes about the necessity to move. Sitting is the new smoking. And the thing that I like to do is safe knee squats. I like these because they exercise the biggest muscles in the body, these big thigh muscles, and they're relatively easy to do. So on your feet, and let's do some squats. I usually do at least 10. So the right way to do this is to go down and up.
I know you're on.
And there's another benefit of this. If you work in a large company or NASA center, and let's say you're walking around the place, and you see somebody you think might have been in a 4D workshop, you can do this and see what they do. And this is the 4D salute. So I nominally try and set a timer on my desk, so every 30 minutes I get up and move this. This takes the toxins out of your blood, and keep going if you like, as much as you like.
Yeah.
No problem.
Love it.
High five, everybody. That
Yeah.
was fantastic.
So also want to share another exercise routine that I do. With a 5-pound potato bag in each hand, extend your arms and hold them as long as you can. Each day you'll find you can hold them a little bit longer. After a couple of weeks, move up to 10-pound potato bags. Then try 50-pound potato bags. You'll eventually get where you can hold 100-pound potato bags for more than a full minute. I'm at this level. When you feel confident with this, put a potato in each bag.
Yeah.
Great.
And then you take a smoke break.
So I mentioned Challenger. I had a payload in the cargo bay of Challenger. That morning, I was out at a nearby NASA center at a meeting. And when I drove back to headquarters, I didn't have the radio on in the car for whatever reason. So I didn't know anything happened. When I drove into, this is the NASA building and NASA headquarters. When I drove into the basement to my parking space, people were waiting for me. And this never happened before. That's the timer going off. So they said, Charlie, Challenger's exploded. Well, this was my little satellite, little in terms of space shuttle, 2,000 kilogram thing. It was a satellite that was designed to go up with a set of scientific instruments. It would be deployed by the shuttle on this arm. The shuttle would then go about its business, staying nearby. Then when it got time to come back, it would grab it again, put it in the cargo bay, bring it home. We'd retrofit it as a way to make a very low-cost satellite. And when I got home that night, my daughter asked me, would I be fired for this? And I said, I don't know. I don't know if my satellite did this or not. And we didn't know what the cause was, but it was a very low-cost operation, a very cheap way to do it. And if it had broken loose from its fittings and gone through the cargo bay doors, it could have caused the thing. Because the problem was that all the kids in America watched this on television because of the teacher in space. So they all got to watch this explode. So,
Charlie?
yeah.
Just a quick comment. Unfortunately, the pain is still there. It was our teacher from Massachusetts,
Oh,
so
right. Yeah, Krista McAuliffe, yep. So, and there's a whole story, we can talk about that offline or the regular weekly if you want. I'm gonna have to take a pause for a second because I got workers coming today that weren't scheduled. Excuse me for a minute. You guys chat the line for a second.
yeah. Nate, do you want to introduce your partner? We haven't
Yes.
met before.
Yes, didn't get a chance to do that before we started. So Larissa, this is Tanya. Tanya, Larissa.
Hi,
Hello.
Tanya. It's a pleasure meeting you.
Likewise. Nat has mentioned you a couple of times, I guess, from the Saturday morning call. So it's
Yeah.
good to finally put the face with the name.
We've
Yeah.
talked about all you guys, so she has a little bit of an advantage.
That's fine. Yeah, and I looked over your website. It just looks beautiful. Congratulations on your really a great venture, and just really wishing you a great success.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm super excited about it as I continue to talk about what we're trying to do on a bigger scale. I get more and more clear about, I think, what we're trying to do and how important I think it's going to be. This information, I think, is going to be critical because our goal is ultimately to do something that's sustainable, that's community driven, and the
Yeah.
social context will be incredibly important.
Kudos to you. I always wanted to do something like this, but there are many different things in life that I wanted to do. So I pick and choose yeah, it's just always been on my mind. I'm 100% vegan and yeah, so oil-free, fat-free vegan. So
Wow.
Yeah.
diligently, it's not that, yeah, with a mindset, it's I have after my sort of a diagnosis with heart, it was much easier to really change my mindset. So because I have a reason to live longer, and I love my grandkids, and I love my husband, and just generally I'm happy every day. Life is a gift. Life is a gift.
Yes, it
So when people asking me how you can really do it, being vegan and oil free, like instead of oil I use water. So apparently you can really do that. So anyway, and that's my motivation. Once you have sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Once you have something like what I had with my heart, you feel like, oh, I have to do something about it. So yeah, so it really helps. And I'm afraid that we need we Nico, we didn't miss you. You want to introduce? I'm here on behalf of like a UK culture. I work with the UK schools again. So you have to make a connection between your partner and Nico, so Nico would not feel abandoned. Nico, are you still with us?
Yeah. Tanya, I would just like to know if you just in short, 1 or 2 sentences, what are you doing?
Well,
It sounds interesting.
so think of it as, when you throw a pebble in the water and then there's a ripple effect. We're working on the first ripple. So the first ripple is just called the Highline Studio. And the Highline Studio is a community-based place for exercise that people can get to in a sustainable fashion. So we're really not trying to set up like a big gym. This is really community driven. We live on a trail system. So it's really for the people that live in this trail kind of accessed area, but they can come and exercise. They can learn a little bit about what their metabolism is. So we do metabolic testing, and that kind of serves as the basis of your blueprint. Once you understand what your metabolism looks like and all the things that can influence it, we can start to kind of build a blueprint for healthy living. That healthy living is intended to be sustainable for yourself and the planet. And so if you look at some of the recent reports that have come out from, so the Lancet produced a report called the Eat Lancet report, and it really is about personal and planetary health and what's the intersection of that. So how can I eat in a way that the world can actually support? And it's far less meat than you probably already would expect. So we look at that, and then we also look at blue zones. And I don't know if you know about what blue zones are, but those are where folks tend to have a very healthy lifestyle that lasts into their 100s.
They live a lot longer.
They live a lot longer. And so using the principles of blue zones, we're thinking about how do we take what we have in our environment and the science of what we know about metabolism and diet and movement and create our own blue zone for our community. And so we're kind of ground zero for all of that. So different than what you might think of as like a normal place where you would go to work out. This is intended to really be kind of ground zero for building a blue zone in our community. So context and social dynamics are incredibly powerful. I worked in public health, and so what my background is in, and health behavior. And actually social connectedness is a huge determinant of whether people will adopt a behavior and keep it up.
Sounds like music to my ears, everything you just said.
Fantastic, yeah, no, it's, I think we have only appreciation for what we've heard. Nat, I didn't have any chance to ask you. Just tell me what you're doing in life. Just a summary.
Sure. Yeah. And then I think it'd be good, Nico, if we get time for you to let Tanya know a little bit about what you've been doing, because I know it's real community centric as well. But my background is a consultant, primarily corporate finance, so budgets, analysis, stuff like that. But I've been always kind of looked at community problems as a place that I wanted to explore more. And I've actually even talked about writing a book, which was the impetus for me getting back in touch with Charlie. So we'll kind of see where that goes. There's the, you got to pay the bills, and the part of my life that tends to pay the bills the easiest is the consulting part. But then, like Tanya said, she's got a real deep background in the exercise science and, overall health. And so she's going to start that part, and then hopefully we're going to start building, more of my life will hopefully become about the social and the community based stuff as well. But yeah, so primarily I'm a corporate finance guy, which was how I kind of met Dr. Pellerin. Was really interested in his leadership class, and I'm hoping to dust off a few more of the skills, because my last few stints in corporate America have been really quite toxic. And there are good companies out there, and I just haven't worked for them. So it's like, okay, either you find a job with one of them, or you just start to create that thing. So yeah, that's kind of me in a bit of a nutshell. So I'm trying to transition, essentially.
That's good that you're doing it together. That's fantastic. That's really a good thing.
Yeah.
And looking at your both happy faces, I feel the vibe. So
That's what we're trying to do. Yeah, build a vibe.
That's the most important thing. It's actually finding a right partner in life. I understand now after all these years that it's more important than anything else in life. So so that's the most important thing in life.
I so support Larissa with that one. You guys know me now. Tanya, you don't. But what Larissa is saying is absolutely true. So I'm 100% searching for this. But currently, I can just show you a ghost next to me. There's like no one yet. But I'll show her soon, Larissa.
All right. Okay, that's good.
It's great to hear all of this.
So Nico, if we've got
Great to hear all of this.
moment here, why don't you give Tanya the summary about what you've been working on? And
It's very interesting. I had a conversation this morning with someone in Manhattan, the corporate culture, and the situation was like nothing else than, a gun to your head. That was basically what the situation is. A toxic. You were using the word toxic. I sometimes wish, Tanya, I can just say I'm a lawyer, and that's end of the story. I'm a doctor.
So,
So it's always difficult when you work in the social environment. The same with you, to really put it in a phrase that will make sense. I just want to see, is Charlie back?
I'm back. Yeah,
Okay,
sorry about
so
that.
we'll do this, we'll catch up later.
The electrician showed up. And the problem with that is that they have very complicated directions from me. And so I had to get, they're interesting people, how can I say? Anyway, so I'm gonna put back so I'm facing the screen for this, might be better. Oh, it's not gonna let me do it. All right, I gotta do more adjustments in this, all right. Forget it. Okay, let's go back over here. I gotta change PowerPoint and everything, and I don't want to do it in the middle of this, so we'll do it like we had before. So I was talking about the Challenger explosion, and what happened is, had nothing to do with me. It was ice on the space shuttle payload, and my friends, and I know these people personally, decided to launch anyway. And the famous O-ring seal, it's a little rubber gasket, failed and let the hot gas out. And you can see the picture of it here. Here's the hot gas coming out of the booster. The tank is filled with liquid hydrogen. You may know hydrogen burns, the buoy. There it was. So what do you think the root cause was? Was it a technical failure or was it a social context failure? What do you think?
Like social context.
Right.
People
100%.
that the people that were least confident in launching didn't have an ability to affect the people at the top that were
Yeah.
feeling the pressure.
Yep.
A lot.
So I thought it was a technical problem. So I watched the failure review board very closely. And one of the most famous physicists in the world, Richard Feynman, was a member. And I watched him take the rubber O-ring material and put it in ice water and saw it stiffen. So when I saw that, I said, aha, it's a technical failure. I quit watching. That's most unfortunate. That was the wrong answer. I later, when I was at CU, picked up and read a book called The Challenger Launch Decision, written by a sociologist, Diane Vaughn, who was adopted as a member of the failure review board. And she said, the important question is, why did they proceed to launch when all the data suggested otherwise? I had not ever heard this explanation before. So the behavior was that they required ever stronger technical arguments to delay a launch than continue, a thing she called normalization of deviance. The social context was NASA pressure to launch, extreme pressure to launch. Now, why was this? To most of NASA, the space shuttle was synonymous with the existence of the agency. The space shuttle didn't succeed, NASA would go away. And one thing bureaucrats care about more than anything else is preserving themselves. And so the shuttle was sold as cheap access to space, and it was going to fly 50 times a year. What was happening was that the cost was about level in the NASA budget. At the time of Challenger, it was launching 10 times a year. So it was the most expensive way to get to space, not the cheapest. So people worried about it being canceled. That led to the launch pressure. And they rained ire down on the contractor because that's where they can complain and bitch. Another thing that happened that's interesting is we look at criticality levels for risk management in terms of numbers. And criticality 1 means if you have a failure, it's loss of mission, which means loss of crew. The NASA, this was originally characterized as Crit 1 redundant because there were 2 O-rings. NASA engineers figured out that if you didn't lose the first O-ring during the initial blast of the first ignition, there wasn't enough gas to seat the second O-ring. So they changed it to criticality 1 and never told the contractor because the communications break down there. And so the contractor was giving recommendations, thinking it was a redundant system. And it's a much more complex story, but this is a little tidbit that interested me, and it was not a redundant system. The social diagnosis, obedience to unfounded optimism, overrode judgment. What's interesting about this is that these are talented, smart engineering managers. I knew them. They're good people. I worked with them on other projects. What could be so powerful as to override their good judgment? The answer is the social context. This sentence in her book struck me, and I've really been moved by this. It is unfortunate that the sociological explanation is the correct one, as these invisible and unacknowledged forces elude remedy. Was it unacknowledged? Yeah, no one ever had a conversation about social context. Is it invisible? Yeah, just like magnetic fields or electric fields or gravitational fields are invisible. So this sentence really changed everything for me. What about this term normalization of deviance? It's better, another way to name it is incremental stupidity, the frog in the boiling water story. And so now on to Hubble Space Telescope. So unfortunately, I did not learn the lessons of Challenger because I didn't know about this and I thought it was a technical failure. So the motto of the program in the early days was conscious expectation of the unexpected. I had one of these coffee mugs that said this from the earliest days. Unfortunately, the fire, of course, destroyed it. But we didn't expect what happened next. So in 1990, April 1990, go down to Kennedy to launch the telescope. And ordinarily, when I had one of my payloads launching, I would go into the VIP area. The reason for that is there are congressional people there, people from the government, and I'd have a chance to kind of mix with people and try and build some support for my next year's budget. So that's kind of what I would do. Hubble had a very special problem. If we had a problem during the ascent phase where we didn't get to the prescribed orbit, there are only two choices, two really bad choices. One would be to leave it in a low orbit where it's going to degenerate and hopefully get another shuttle up to reboost it before it burned up. Once it started to do that, it would happen very rapidly. The second was to leave it in the shuttle and land at the backup landing strip, probably in Dakar, Africa. And the cargo bay had vending doors and it's dirty there. So it would fill the thing with dirt and you'd have, at a level of an optical system, you have to take it home, take it apart. It was not designed for this. Probably take at least 5 years to take it all to pieces, clean them all, put them back together. So NASA decided I would be the person to make that decision. So that meant I had to sit in the blockhouse during the ascent phase with a headphone and a control panel like this. And the bad thing about this is if you want to sit in that place, you got to be trained. What training means is simulations, and what simulation means is failures. So you sit in there with all these other people and practice what happens if the shuttle blows up on the launch pad, what happens if it does this, what happens if it does that. So one of the more depressing things I've ever done is to go through all that and experience these imaginary failures over and over and over, but did that. Fortunately, the ascent phase had no difficulties. I didn't have to make this decision. I was really glad not to do this. There was no good answer, and all I had was a little table I made in front of me and whatever I decided, of course, would be second guessed forever. Anyway, didn't have to do that. I got on a NASA training aircraft. This is called an STA. This is a Gulfstream modified, so you can the way that they practice landing a shuttle. They take this thing, put it down at 45 degrees, put engines in full reverse, basically dive onto the runway. An ordinary plane comes in at 3 degrees. So they flew it like a regular airplane, took me over to Houston. This is mission control. You're probably familiar with this. I'm not on the floor here because I was not trained for this. Didn't need to be. I'm in a little VIP room, again, with the other bigwigs. And I've got staff in what they call back rooms talking to me about what's going on. Well, the first problem was the solar arrays got stuck. And with no solar arrays, you got no power. With no power, you can't deploy it. That took several hours. Finally, we got that fixed. That's a longer story about those. I knew they were crappy, and ESA provided them. I tried to get ESA to change the design, and they refused. So we went with them. Anyway, so we finally, the solar arrays come out, the thing powers up, the gyros come on, the computer comes on, the shuttle comes back to Earth, everything's cool. I go back to Washington. About six weeks later, I go out to the control center at Goddard, which is near DC, to open the aperture bay door and take the first image. I'd want to do this in private, but my boss in a press conference agreed to do it in public. So the whole world watched us together. This is what the control center looked like in those days. Look at those monitors. The door opens, star appears, and everybody cheers. So I look at it. I've got my chief system engineer next to me, Gene Oliver. I said, Gene, those images are fuzzy. He said, don't worry. Said, we knew that the secondary mirror might be out of position. So we biased it outward so that if we need to focus it, we just turn the stepping motor in one direction. You don't have to hunt back and forth. This is an idea to reduce risk. We can fix this, no worries. I'm very happy. Everybody's happy. Telescope works, looks fine. I've always enjoyed Japan, and especially I like to go to these rokans, which are these inns that date back to the 8th century. And I had several international agreements with the Japanese Space Agency, and they know what I like most to do is go to one of these places where foreigners never go or can't go. So it's you sleep in the tatami mat at night. The bed is in here in these cabinets. They put futons on the floor, and they all have what's called a kaiseki dinner. This is a Japanese 10, 12 course dinner. These are delicious to me. Not everybody would like it, but it's got some strange stuff, but I'm used to it. So I go to my boss at the time, Lynn Fisk, and I said, Lynn, Hubble's all good. Everything's working great. I'm going to go to Japan for a week. And although I've got a pager, there's no point because you're not going to be able to reach me because I can't get to a telephone in a place like this. That if they even have a phone, I have no idea how to use it or how to pay for it. So I'm going to be gone for a week. And he and I were good friends. He's a great guy. And being who he was, he said, no problem, Charlie. What can I do for you while you're gone? So I said, Lynn, there's going to be medals in the Rose Garden for Hubble. And I'd like you to make sure George Bush puts mine on me and not Dan Quayle. So we had a little laugh over this. And off I go. A week later, without no contact with anybody, I'm back in the US in the St. Louis airport. In those days, I could fly business class, so I'm in the red carpet lounge, and I decide to call Washington. What's going on? So my secretary answers the phone, and first thing she says is, have you talked to Dr. Fisk lately? And I said, no. Well, I'll put you right through. So I'm wondering, wow, this is kind of cool. This may be about medals in the Rose Garden, because usually you don't get put right through to a person at that level. So he comes on the phone, and he says, Charlie, what do you know about spherical aberration? And I said, what I know is when amateurs make telescope mirrors and they do it sloppily, you get what's called a downturn edge. So light reflecting in different places on the mirror focuses on different places on the optical axis, and the telescope can never be focused. So he says, and you launched Hubble Space Telescope with a spherically aberrated mirror. This is 2 PhDs. I said, did not. He says, did so, did not, did so, did not, did so. So he says, okay, do this. He says, put down the phone, don't hang up, come back with the front page of any national newspaper. So I find the St. Louis Times-Dispatch. I'd like to agree to run over 3 or 4 minutes to finish this. Is that okay with everybody? Okay.
Yep.
Not
Sure.
longer. So this is an absolute true story. He says, read what it says above the fold. So I come back with the St. Louis Times-Dispatch, and I read, national disaster. Hubble launched with flawed mirror. He says, now what do you say? I said, ha, 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 boy, you guys are good. You put a fake newspaper into this very airport lounge for me. So the expression, denial is not a river in Egypt. So he said, when are you going to be back at work? I said, I'll be back tomorrow morning. He said, well, I'm going to see you at 7 o'clock in my conference room. That was unusual. Work normally starts at 8. So I walk in there and everyone's mad at me. How the hell did you let this happen? I had no friggin' idea what happened. So next thing is Lynn says, we need to form our own failure review board before Congress does, because Congress will give us a chairman, a lawyer as the chairman. And we don't want that, as I agree. So how about the director of JPL, Lou? He's a great guy. I know him well, super guy, perfect. So we got the failure review board, and Lou calls a meeting at the contractor plant. We go up there for 3 days, and people put forward various theories of what went wrong, and nobody knows. It's a complete mystery. So I go back to Washington, and don't know what happened or why. And the administrator's office calls, and I'm summoned to meet with Barbara Mikulski, the head of NASA's appropriations. Now, this person has more power over NASA than anybody because she decides the budget. She's the chairman of the appropriations committee, and she's mad. She's mad because she asked me about a year earlier, will it work? Now, I didn't know whether it would work or not for reasons I'll explain later, but what would you say?
Of course.
Would you say maybe? Would you
No.
say, I don't know? You'd say, of course it's gonna work.
Oh.
Well, that's what I said, and then when it didn't, she's mad. So again, I really didn't know, and I'll talk more about this later. So maybe this is a good place to pause. We're only 1 minute over, and I'll tell you about the major technical problems in Hubble and what happened next to led to the fix.
Sure.
Is this fun for everybody?
It's great.
Okay. So Fari said Wednesday would be better for him.
All good, all good.
Does Wednesday work just as well for you folks?
I think so.
It does.
Larissa? If not, we'll keep it Tuesday.
Sorry, I have to look at my schedule. I teach in, I don't know the schedule for the spring semester yet.
Will you know by the end of the week?
Probably not, but Tuesday looks more promising than Wednesday.
Well, let's just leave it on Tuesday then. And Fari said he's happy to look at the recording.
Okay, great, thank you.
Everybody's good with Tuesday?
That works fine.
This
Thank
time of day is good?
Yeah,
It's good for you, Nico?
Yeah. So good
Okay,
for me.
thank you
Yeah,
all,
it's good for me.
and I'll see you same time, same station. Next
Same-
week.
same.
Thanks, Dr.
Thank
Keller.
you
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
That was great. That was really good.
Good, okay, great.